So today I am at Honey Run Falls with Alana and Keegan, and I thought I would do something just a little bit different today. A very common question that I get is, how did you get the water to look like that? And that seems sort of like a simple concept to me, but I do remember a time when it wasn't. And a lot of the really much better photographers that I follow, they kind of touch on it, but already with a little bit of skill to be told. So I thought I would go ahead here and set up and do a little bit of an experiment. And well, here's what my pick is, and then I'll get into all that. All right, so here's a couple things that if you're looking for the water to be sort of smooth and drawn out, you need a longer exposure. And really one of the keys to that is you're going to have to pack a tripod of some kind. It doesn't need to be a great tripod in all honesty, but you need to get your camera off your hand. The trick is, if you don't have a great tripod or a lower cost one, you're going to get some more wiggle and wobble after you go to trigger your shutter. So go ahead and set your timer up for at least 2 seconds. I actually usually on this tripod leave it for 5 seconds, but you're going to want to get your camera off the tripod. Now when you go off your tripod, my camera has a switch for, in this case it's a Tamron, so it calls it VR, but some sort of image stabilization or vibration stabilization. When you transition your camera to a tripod, you want to turn that off. Some cameras have a built-in, I know I'm on a tripod, and they automatically turn that off for you, but many don't. Better safe than sorry, and turn that vibration stabilization off. The reason you want to do that is, in the absence of vibration, when your camera is really still, it's sort of looking around and hunting, trying to get ready for vibration that isn't there. It'll actually make your image less sharp in the places that you're looking for it to be sharp. So once you've got your lens or your camera set up where you're not using vibration, any sort of vibration stabilization, you're set up on your tripod, you've composed your scene, the next thing is to figure out how you want to manage that exposure. Again, you're really looking for a longer exposure, and this is where it all comes to taste, and it's sort of fun. What I've put on my lens here is a Polar Pro 2 to 5 stop ND filter. So it's basically sunglasses for my lens, and the reason I've done that is so I can share for you different exposure times. As far as my camera settings, what I'm using is aperture priority. That lets me set whatever aperture I want, and I'm leaving my ISO in manual mode most of the time. This first shot that I'm going to take and show you, I'm going to go ahead and leave my ISO auto, aperture priority, in this case set to f11. And the reason I'm trying to balance here a smaller aperture but still keep things kind of sharp. Again, the smaller aperture means I'm going to get a longer exposure time. So in aperture priority mode, you could also use manual. You're wanting to get full control. With aperture priority, I'm saying I want f11, and because I've locked my ISO, the only other variable there then is time. So the camera is going to add or remove time to get what it thinks is a proper exposure based on your meter mode. If you don't know about what meter mode is, I'm not going to dive into that here. I'll either follow up later if you ask me to in comments, or do some Google searching, because that one's covered pretty well on other channels. Alright, so the image you just saw was what I did is I actually undid the ISO into lockdown where I had it in f100. I went ahead and let it go in auto, and my camera immediately thought, well, you must want the exposure to be faster, and I don't know what sort of magic it's using to decide that, but it immediately cranked my ISO up to 1100, and that made for a much shorter image. So what you just saw was sort of almost a lock-in time of the waterfall with that ISO all the way up at 1100, and then just by putting my ISO back as I described into 100, ISO 100, excuse me, that brought my exposure up, or what my camera believes to be a proper exposure, to a half a second. And that's sort of starting to hit the wheelhouse of what I tend to like in waterfalls. I tend to like between a half, and then depending on the amount of water, sometimes I'll go up to like 1 1/3 second, maybe 2 seconds. So what I'm going to do now is I'm leaving my ISO at that 100. Again, sorry, I'm saying that a lot. And I'm going to go from 0 stops to 2 stops to 3 to 4 to 5, increasingly darkening those sunglasses. And what that's going to do is my camera's just going to add time to compensate for the sunglasses that I'm putting in front of it. And you'll be able to see how the waterfalls get more and more soft. Alright, so just for giggles, I went ahead and swapped out that variable Polar Pro 2 to 5 stop, actually 0 to 5 stop, because it will turn all the way off, ND filter. I slapped on a 10 stop on here. And a 10 stop is such a leap forward that given this overcast day that we have here in Ohio, I actually had to increase my ISO a little bit more. Now, some of you might know that I shoot with a Nikon D810, which would actually allow me to go to a lower ISO. The base ISO for this camera is 64, and the lower that ISO number, the longer the exposure that I can get. The reason I'm using 100 for most of those images is just because most of the cameras on the market have an ISO 100 range, so I thought that would be more relevant data to you. That's actually a trick that I use quite often. More often than not, before I personally jump to an ND filter, I'll go ahead and just work with my aperture and maybe a polarizer. That polarizer will usually give you between a half and 1 stop of ND as well, and I like knocking some of those reflections out. So between getting that little bit of a stop and maybe going to f16 or something, a lot of times I don't actually use an ND filter when shooting waterfalls. Nonetheless, just so that you can see what it's really doing to the image, I'm going to maximize that effect here with a 10 stop, and I had to increase my ISO here just to get an exposure. I don't have a timer release or anything to use bulb mode, and I'm limited to 30 seconds. But anyway, here comes that image now. All right, so what did you think? I'm curious, what time out of those? Was it the no stop at all? Was it the 2 stop, 3 stop, 5? Did you like the 10? For me personally, it gets a little bit too mushy and marshmallowy for me when the exposure gets too long, but this is one of the cool things about photography as an art is what do you really like? I think for me, having seen these already on the back of the camera, my ultimate photo from this exact location anyway, it's going to be a little bit of all of them. I like somewhere between that 1.5 second or that 1 second, half a second range on the main waterfalls. I like a little longer here up close. I kind of like those really long exposures in the mid-ground where it smoothed out that water. So I'm going to share you my composition of all of those elements right now, and I'm going to explore a little bit more here and see what other views I can get. All right, so there you go. A few more images, a neat little area. It's literally just off the road. Honey Run Falls, Honey Run Park, just outside of Howard, Ohio. It's actually where some of my family's from. So about a 2-hour drive from home, but it's just a nice country drive. We're still very much trying to stay socially distant. I think that's it for me. Just a short one, kind of a how-to on this one. I'd really love to hear from you what you think. I've been hesitant to do this type of video largely because I see myself still very much learning a lot myself. There's a lot of good information out there on the interwebs, but at the same time, in this one place, I think I actually kind of have a good feeling for everything I'm doing there, and I thought I'd share. So please let me know what you think, and stay safe out there. See you next week. P.S. Thanks to Alana for doing the camera work back there.